as of a million angry snakes. The huge temple was utterly deserted, and, save for this sibilant, pervading sound, utterly silent, an awesome and overpowering place. "Do these candles of yours ever go out?" asked Leo of Oros, placing his hand before his dazzled eyes. "How can they?" replied the priest in his smooth matter of fact voice, "seeing that they rise from the eternal fire which the builders of this hall worshipped. Thus they have burned from the beginning, and thus they will burn for ever, though, if we wish it, we can shut off their light." [Footnote: This, as I ascertained afterwards, was done by thrusting a broad stone of great thickness over the apertures through which the gas or fire rushed and thus cutting off the air. These stones were worked to and fro by means of pulleys connected with iron rods. End of the footnote. Be pleased to follow me, you will see greater things. So in awed silence we followed, and oh! how small and miserable we three human beings looked alone in that vast temple illuminated by this lightning radiance. We reached the end of it at length, only to find that to right and left ran transepts on a like gigantic scale and lit in the same amazing fashion. Here Oros bade us halt, and we waited a little while till presently from either transept arose a sound of chanting, and we perceived that white-robed processions advancing towards us from their depths. On they came very slowly, and we saw that the procession to the right was a company of priests, and that to the left a company of priestesses, 100 or so of them in all. Now the men ranged themselves in front of us, while the women ranged themselves behind, and at a signal from Oros, all of them, still chanting some wild and thrilling hymn, once more we started forward, this time along a narrow gallery closed at the end with double wooden doors. As our procession reached these they opened, and before us lay the crowning wonder of this marvellous fane, a vast ellipse-shaped apse. Now we understood. The plan of the temple was the plan of the looped pillar which stood upon the brow of the peak, and as we rightly guessed, its dimensions were the same. At intervals around this ellipse the fiery columns flared, but otherwise the place was empty. No, not quite, for at the head of the apse, almost between two of the flame columns, stood a plain, square altar of the size of a small room, in front of which, as we saw when we drew nearer, were hung curtains of woven silver thread. On this altar was placed a large statue of silver that, baked as it was by the black rock, seemed to concentrate and reflect from its burnished surface the intense light of the two blazing pillars. It was a lovely thing, but to describe it is hard indeed. The figure, which was winged, represented a draped woman of mature years, and pure but gracious form, half hidden by the forward bending wings. Sheltered by these, yet shown between them, appeared the image of a male child, clasped to its bearer's breast with her left arm, while the right was raised towards the sky. A study of motherhood evidently, but how shall I write of all that was conveyed by those graven faces? To begin with the child. It was that of a sturdy boy, full of health and the joy of life. Yet he had been sleeping, and in his sleep some terror had overshadowed him with the dark shades of death and evil. There was fear in the lines of his sweet mouth and on the lips and cheeks that seemed to quiver. He had thrown his little arm about his mother's neck, and pressing close against her breast, looked up to her for safety, his right hand and outstretched finger pointing downwards and behind him, as though to indicate whence the danger came. Yet it was passing, already half forgotten, for the upturned eyes expressed confidence renewed, peace of soul attained. And the mother, she did not seem to mock or chide his fears, for her lovely face was anxious and alert, yet upon it breathed a very atmosphere of unchanging tenderness and power invincible, care for the helpless, strength to shelter it from every harm. The great, calm eyes told their story. The parted lips were whispering some tale of hope, sure and immortal, the raised hand revealed whence the hope arose. All love seemed to be concentrated in the brooding figure, so human, yet so celestial, all heaven seemed to lie an open path before those quivering wings. And see, the arching instep, the upward springing foot, suggested that thither those wings were bound, bearing their God given burden far from the horror of the earth, deep into the bosom of the changeless rest above. The statue was only that of a affrighted child in its mother's arms, its interpretation made clear even to the dullest by the simple symbolism of some genius, humanity saved by the divine. While we gazed at its enchanting beauty, the priests and priestesses, feeling away the right and left, arranged themselves alternately, first a man and then a woman, within the ring of the columns of fire that burned around the loop-shaped shrine. So great was its circumference that the whole 100 of them must stand wide apart one from another, and, to our sight, resembled little lonely children clad in gleaming garments, while their chant of worship reached us only like echoes thrown from a far precipice. In short, the effect of this holy shrine and its occupants was superb yet overwhelming; at least I know that it filled me with a feeling akin to fear. Oros waited till the last priest had reached his appointed place. Then he turned and said in his gentle, reverent tones "Draw nigh, now, O wanderers well beloved, and give greetings to the Mother," and he pointed towards the statue. "Where is she?" asked Leo in a whisper, for here we scarcely dared to speak aloud. "I see no one." "The Hesea dwells yonder," he answered, and, taking each of us by the hand, he led us forward across the great emptiness of the Apse to the altar at its head. As we drew near, the distant chant of the priests gathered in volume, assuming a glad triumphant note, and it seemed to me, though this, perhaps was fancy, that the light from the twisted columns of flame grew even brighter. At length we were there, and Oros, loosing our hands, prostrated himself thrice before the altar. Then he rose again, and falling behind us, stood in silence with bent head and folded fingers. We stood silent also, our hearts filled with mingled hope and fear, like a cup with wine. Were our labours ended? Had we found her whom we sought? Or were we, perchance, but enmeshed in the web of some marvellous mummery, and about to make acquaintance with the secret of another new and mystical worship? For years and years we had searched, enduring every hardness of flesh and spirit that man can suffer, and now we were to learn whether we had endured in vain. Yes, and Leo would learn if the promise was to be fulfilled to him, or whether she, whom he adored, had become but a departed dream to be sought for only beyond the gate of death. Little wonder that he trembled and turned white in the agony of that great suspense. Long, long was the time. Hours, years, ages, aeons seemed to flow over us as we stood there before glittering silver curtains that hid the front of the black altar beneath the mystery of the sphinx like face of the glorious which was its guardian, closed with that frozen smile of eternal love and pity. All the past went before us as we struggled in those dark waters of our doubt. Item by item, event by event, we rehearsed the story which began in the caves of Kôr, for our thoughts, so long attuned, were open to each other and flashed from soul to soul. Oh, now we knew, they were opened also to another soul. We could see nothing save the altar and the effigy, we could only hear the slow chant of the priests and priestesses and the snake-like hiss of the rushing fires. Yet we knew that our hearts were as an open book to one who watched beneath the Mother's shadowing wings. Chapter 13